let's just settle down for a second on the whole Crocodile Dundee from where it started, the idea. I mean, where did the name come from for a start? Crocodile Dundee.
Well, it came from Hogs.
No, but where did they think of the name?
Well, Hogs, because he was we just moved to Byron. We'd kind of finished with the Paul Hogan show. We'd gone, 9 years. It was, for me, it was like 11 or 12, I think, for them.
You were doing, at that time, you were doing Sail of the Century?
Yeah.
Yep.
After we moved to Byron. And so they were looking for something. John was always wanting to make a movie with Hogs, always believed that he had star quality. So he was writing scripts. And at the same time, Paul was in New York on one of the tourism campaign trips, and he was walking back through a very crowded New York street at peak hour and being jostled and people everywhere, and he felt like a real hick. And he's thinking to himself, if I feel like a hick, imagine how Barney, who lives down the road, feels like. How would he feel? Or even better, a bloke from the outback. And by the time he got to his room, he had a story formulated. And that was an outline for a script. He expanded on the idea of the fish out of water concept to this outback bloke who ends up in New York City. So all good film stories have to have a protagonist and an antagonist and a theme, and the love story was the theme. And so Hogs only ever writes in block capital letters. So he wrote it out in block capital letters. It got typed up, and then John took his red pen to it. And as Hogs will say, he's the greatest sub-editor he'd ever met. He would always stop Paul from being over lengthy in his monologues, or any other time he had to sort of say a lot of dialogue. John was very pithy. He was a great editor, and he had journalism as a background. So he would write concisely and improve it and keep honing and honing. And he did that constantly with Hogs, whether it was his performance or his writing. So he got hold of it, and together they transformed it into the script that it became. I read the second draft the other day, and it was nowhere near what the final draft was like. I actually read the initial one over John's shoulder, and then he asked me to read it. And there are a couple of things in there where you thought, nah, Hero wouldn't do that. And so, I'm not suggesting that I had much input, but
I think you did. I think
a female perspective was sought. And so it came to life. But essentially, it's Hogs. Hogs will tell you that Mick Dundee is just Hogs in the bush.
For real. Yes.
That's in the doco too. Yeah.
Because it's real.
It's real.
You
it's
can't
authentic.
you can't be authentic yourself. You just can't beat that, because you can't act that out. It is what it is.
That's right. But Hogs in the bush is different to Paul Hogan in the bush. Hogs is the character.
Yeah.
The quintessential Aussie bloke who'll tell you what's
put
going on.
But it doesn't matter. He put it on well.
Yeah.
So I need to ask you, it's the obvious question I need to ask, because everybody wants to know this. The knife scene, that's not a knife. It was I don't know whether it was never meant to be so brilliant, but it just became so brilliant that they went, wow, that worked. Or was there purpose behind it?
Well, that's interesting, because even just the other day when I was reading this second draft, the knife scene, that line wasn't even in there.
In the second draft?
No, was not. I was amazed. I thought, wow, that got put in. I don't know how many drafts they did. I don't think they did too many, because they didn't used to rewrite a lot. So I have to check the final draft, what number that was, because that's something that I would like to know, because draft 2 was so different to the final script.
Was there much improv going on there? By Hogs?
No, not in those days. If you only had $8.8 million budget, that meant that you could only buy this amount of film, because you shot on film, and film was expensive. That meant that everybody involved had to be really on their mark, that you couldn't do take 137.
Yeah.
You didn't have enough film. So that made for me, the teamwork much more collaborative and everybody on the same mission. And so there may have been, if there was a take 2 or 3 or 4, there might have been slightly different gestures, but no dialogue, no improvisation, no loose lips in that way. And so the knife scene somehow, I mean, the mugger was in there and there was a knife, but that's not a knife, was not in draft 2.
It wasn't.
No, and then the other really interesting thing about that too, that knife scene, is that when they were editing, when John was editing that scene, they didn't have that particular take. And he knew that it had been shot because what had happened with that particular take was that Peter Feynman had said cut, and Paul kept mucking around with this kid, and he was playing with him. And
in his inimitable way, like just mucking around.
Mucking around after cut.
Yeah.
And he had a glint in his eye because he was being playful. And John had seen that when they were filming. And when they were editing, that's the take that he was looking for because it didn't look too threatening. It looked like ha, ha, ha. And so that's not it. No, that's not it. There's another take. And it was in the editing room bin.
Wow.
And John fished it out and put that in the film because that was the take.
John, do you miss him?
Yeah. I think that's kind of like why I did the documentary, is because I didn't want him to not be here anymore. And it was really confronting to see footage of him looking so prime and sexy and smart and gorgeous in that behind-the-scenes Crocodile Dundee footage. But even though it was extremely challenging and I was in tears most days looking at it, at the end I didn't want to let it go. And I think that when I release the film, I'll feel like I can let it go because I don't want to hold him here in his spirit. Do you know what I mean? I feel like I am a little bit by making him feel so alive. He'll always be in my heart. And I have a photograph that I talk to. I talk to him. And whatever pops into my head is like, thanks, John, because this doesn't sound like me. So I never want to lose that. But as well as not wanting to let him go, I also wanted him to be honoured for his contribution because he was, as you say, so much behind the scenes and stayed out of the limelight, didn't want public accolades, didn't believe in blowing his own trumpet. But I wanted to blow it for him because I know what that guy did for Australia, for Paul's career, for cricket, for everything he put his patriotic hand to, always in the most altruistic way, always for the greater good. That needs acknowledging and applauding. And it wasn't just his contribution in Crocodile Dundee. It was everybody else who wasn't recognised as much as Paul was, and rightly so. He's the star. But Russell Boyd, who did this incredible cinematography, Australia's premier cinematographer, doing a comedy film. And that's, I think, a whole other element to Crocodile Dundee, is that it has this grandeur and magnificence of photography in the outback because somebody like Russell Boyd was helming that as cinematographer. And even though it was a comedy, it just felt big because of his skill and his team, like Key Grip, Ray Brown, and the composer who wrote a fantastic, unforgettable score, and Linda, who's never really been asked about her role on the film. When I interviewed her, she said, "Oh, no one ever asks me. They always talk about me, but they never ask me." I said, "Well, you go for it, because I'm now asking you, what happened to you in that whole story?"
Looks like she fell in love with Paul.
And she did.
And I mean it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Peter Feynman, the director,
yep,
who's in the documentaries, he also comments on that, watching that unfold, because we shot chronologically. So they didn't know each other at all at the beginning of the film.
How did she get sourced? Why did they pick Linda Kozlowski?
Kozlowski.
Kozlowski. Why did they pick Linda?
They wanted. We couldn't afford a big name. Paul had never made a movie. John had never made a movie. But Peter Feynman had never made a movie, and Linda had never made a movie. And so you start off fresh with new faces and new attitudes and people who really want to perform. And so John picked Linda out in a lineup of black and white photographs, and then flew her out here for the job. She auditioned in LA, flew her out here for the job. Paul couldn't even make eye contact with her at first. He's quite shy, particularly around women. In all the years that I worked with him on the Paul Hogan show, I never saw him stray. A very honourable man. A lot of opportunity, but didn't take any of them. And so Linda found that weird because, you know, she came from a background of training with Juilliard, which was a highly regarded drama school in New York City. Paul hates to rehearse. He didn't even want to rehearse. So she's wondering, what the hell am I doing here? And she's in the outback where there's everything to bite you and some things that might eat you. And she's petrified because she comes from New York City. She had this fear of bugs. She would go and sleep on the floor of Peter Feynman's cabin with Peter and his wife in the bed, her on the floor, because she was too scared to stay in her own cabin.
Wow.
Initially. So Peter Feynman spent a lot of time talking her around, as did I when I was on set on Croc. I was still doing Sail until halfway through it, and then I quit that to join John. But the times that I got to be in Kakadu with Linda, I was there to comfort and keep her company and reassure her that this will be all right. And then gradually they just found each other, and then they found love for each other.
And do you think the movie's more powerful because they actually were sort of falling in love over a period of time? Maybe whether they...
I do.
Yeah, it was actual love story.
It's a true love story, and they stayed together for 20 years. And that kind of thing, when you see that on a screen, it's intangible. You're not quite sure why you're relating to that so strongly, but it's almost subliminal. It's so strongly there, but you can't quite put your finger on it. But there's a chemistry that comes off those scenes that was felt between those two people, because the first time that they kiss at the Billabong in the film was their first kiss.
And it was probably for real.
It was absolutely for real. And you can kind of see that in the way that Paul hesitates and looks at her a bit more, and then he kisses her. You know, I put that in the documentary because I'm hoping that people will go to see the documentary because it will unlock so many of the things that people didn't know about what happened on the making of Crocodile Dundee. And we found this incredible footage, and it shows it all. And I really wanted to share that with people because it'll just add such a different dimension,
lots of layers,
extra layer to their experience of watching the film when it comes out again in May.